Okay, so the next thing that you're going to do is you guys are going to listen to me talk a little bit about the Holocaust, just to make sure that we're kind of all on the same page. And then whoever is your guest teacher, they are going to come around with kind of a fanned out, or however they choose to do it, group of what are called Holocaust victim identity cards. And they're little half sheet laminated papers with an actual person, okay, a real person who either was alive, is still alive, perished during the Holocaust, and so forth. Okay. And you're going to pick one of those at random, doesn't matter who. Okay. And then you're going to read through them, and I'll talk a little bit more about this. But starting tomorrow, once you've done a couple more activities with it, you're going to find out whether or not that person lived or died during the Holocaust. Okay. But before we get into that, here are kind of like a really condensed version. Here is a condensed version of what I really want you guys to understand. You have been listening to the Diary of Anne Frank, and this is just one instance of what happened to people while living in the Holocaust. Okay. Most people, when they think like people who died in the Holocaust, died in concentration camps. And that's not the case. Some people were in hiding and they were caught. Yes, some people were in concentration camps. Some people were walking from concentration camp to another one and died due to malnutrition, disease, and that kind of thing. But how did people get here? So first of all, World War One ended. Germany lost. This is something that we talked about at the very beginning. Germany lost. And Germany, a lot of people do not like them at this point. Okay. They don't have money. They owe money to a ton of different countries. They don't have enough food to fill their bellies, and they're kind of going through their own depression. Another thing is the currency in Germany at this point is called a franc. Okay. And their money, their franc, is worth nothing after the war. If you think of a dollar, okay, one US American dollar, in order to make one US American dollar at this time, it would take like 10,000 francs. Okay, let that set in. 10,000 francs to equal $1. So basically, these people in Germany, even if they had money, it was worth nothing because of losing the war. Okay, so they're all feeling super, super bad. And all of a sudden, this man who's moving up in the ranks of political power, Adolf Hitler, becomes chancellor. And the chancellor of Germany is actually even higher up than a president. Okay, Germany has a president, but it's mainly for just namesake. A chancellor is somebody who actually is like the executive ruler of the government. They make all of the decisions. And so Adolf Hitler becomes the chancellor. He realizes that everybody is feeling just awful, right? Because they have lost the First World War. And Hitler comes around and he says, you know what? You follow me. I can fix this. I can make Germany a place that everybody wants to live in. And one of the things about people feeling bad or a problem is everybody wants somebody to blame. Because if you have somebody to blame and you get rid of that, the problem is fixed. And in this particular case, the people that Hitler blamed were the Jewish people. And the reasoning for it is at this time, many Jewish people owned a ton of businesses. They also owned banks. And so the money was tied up. A lot of their money was tied up by Jewish people. And so what Adolf Hitler said is, hey, if we get rid of the Jews, all that money will come back to us. And Germany will be this great country again that people want to live in. And because people were feeling so sad and so bad, they went, oh, okay, I'll totally follow you. I don't want to live like this anymore. And if that's all it takes, I'll do it. But the problem is that people didn't actually realize what was going to happen when they started to follow Hitler. Okay, so I would say from like 1933 until about 1939, this is when that's a long time. 1933 to 1939, Hitler starts to like develop these plans. He's making Jewish people, and really beyond that, gypsies, anybody with a physical or mental disability, anybody of color, anybody who didn't fit his Aryan race, blonde hair, blue eyes, okay, they were targeted. And so Jewish people specifically wore the yellow Star of David. So everybody knew that they were a Jew. They had to carry around papers that said that they were Jewish. If they owned a business, they were basically said, give your business to somebody else or leave. You don't get this anymore. Um, Kids were no longer able to go to public schools if they were Jewish. You couldn't ride a bike. You couldn't get in an automobile. You couldn't use public transportation. All of these really basic human rights are being stripped of these people, okay? And when things like that start to happen, the internal soul starts to go like, you start to feel really, really bad, okay? Now, beginning in about like 1939, 1938, 1940, ghettos start to be erected. They start to like take place. And a ghetto is basically a small area in the same town, okay, but a small area where there's like brick walls or a chain link fence erected, put up. And anybody who was Jewish now had to leave their home, take a suitcase, that's it, and leave their home and go into this ghetto where they aren't fed properly. You no longer get to live where you normally would. You're living with people that you don't even know, and they're living and just waiting and not knowing what the heck is going on. And conditions are awful. People are getting sick, they're cold, they're hungry. Until about 1939 is when Hitler started to make all of these concentration camps. And this is when like the big plan really started, okay? And little by little, people would receive what are called call-up papers. And a call-up paper is basically a request for you to go to a labor camp. And at this point, a labor camp is just a fancy way of saying a concentration camp. You don't want to go there. If you think about the Diary of Anne Frank, Margaret received call-up papers. And that's why Edith and Otto Frank had kind of had an idea that something bad was going to happen, and that's why they had the secret annex created. And as soon as Margaret got the call-up papers, they all went back to the secret annex, and that's where they were. So if we go back to all of this, little by little, people are getting call-up papers, right? And a lot of people are getting taken to concentration camps. Until finally, what's happening now is they would use people would do marches and they would have to walk miles, hundreds of miles, no food, awful conditions to concentration camps, or they were taken in what's known as a cattle car. So if you think of Farmington with the trains that we have and the size of those train box cars, I guess, that's what it was, except for they weren't metal. They were made of wood. And so you think of these wood slats. And in these cattle cars, there are two buckets. One bucket is full of water. The other bucket is for human waste. And they would pack people into these cattle cars so that you couldn't move. Okay? There's no sitting down. There's no like wiggle room or anything. You are smushed. Okay? So even though there's this bucket of water, you're not going to get a drink of water. Absolutely. As soon as that cattle car takes off, it's going to slosh out. And that bucket for human waste, it's a nice thought. But how are you going to get up there if you have to go to the bathroom? Okay? And so people, as they were being transported from the ghettos to the concentration camps, would be in this packed cattle car from 2 to like 9 days. No food, obviously no water. If you had to go to the bathroom, you went standing up. Many people died in that transportation. And when they died, they would end up continuing to stand because you couldn't fall over because there were so many people there. And there were lots of different stops along the way. Some people got off at a concentration camp. They would bring other people in from one concentration camp, and then the cattle car would keep going to the next one. So it's a lot of transfer, a lot of diseases coming on, diseases going out. And eventually, when they reached the concentration camp that they were supposed to be at, they were met with a sorting process, which if you went one way, mostly if you went one way, it was for people who were able to work. So boys, 12 years or older, men, girls that were strong enough to do this kind of labor. The other side was elderly, mothers with children, and the sickly, people that were already sick from transportation. And if you went this way, there's a huge chance that you would immediately be killed, either in a firing line, which is like with guns, or you would end up in gas chambers. But before you end there, they would shave your head, no matter what side you went to. But they would shave your head because they were worried about bugs. If you had like a gold tooth, they would pop those out so they could melt them and sell them for money. And then the Nazis would tell people, we're going to take a shower. And unfortunately, some of those showers were actual showers, water. And once you got out, then you were forced to work in terrible, terrible conditions. Or you were in a gas chamber where somebody would climb up and drop gas. And within 20 minutes, anybody who was in that gas chamber was dead. And they would pull you out, put you in a big like hole or trough in the ground. And then they would put in another group of people and drop the gas. So by the end of all of this, okay, end of World War II, end of the Holocaust is 1945. Over 6 million Jewish people were murdered during this time because Hitler made it his idea that there was a group of people to blame. And if you got rid of the group of people, then Germany would be wonderful again. So let that kind of sink in. That's kind of a gist of the Holocaust. It's really icky. All right, so your guest teacher is going to hand out a half sheet of paper that has an identity of a real person. Please be sensitive to that in knowing that this person was living or is living to this day. I want you to read over it, really kind of get to know them, and then I also want you to take a picture of it with your iPad so that tomorrow you don't have to go and find all these identity cards. It'll already be a picture on your iPad. Once you've done that, your guest teacher is going to hand out another half sheet of paper, one just to your chunk, your pod, and there are 4 sentence starters, 4 questions. One which is like, my victim's name is this. This is what happened to my person. My prediction is kind of thing. And you'll have that conversation. Because now that you're back in school, you have to actually talk. It's so good for you, I promise. I can't wait to listen to all of those conversations. And then after that, if there's time, you'll watch a video. So hopefully I didn't bore you with my kind of Holocaust rundown. I cannot wait to see you guys on Wednesday when I hopefully return. And as always, reach out to me if you have questions. And I'll see you later. Bye.